Today, I'd like to talk about superpowers, or special energy abilities. These are abilities that tend to emerge the more skillful we become in working with subtle energy. They also grow as we become more spiritually aware and grounded. And of course, some people have special abilities naturally. It's already their natural language. But whoever you are, whether you have some special abilities already or not, everybody can learn how to cultivate them. I think this is a very important topic because it's a place where human beings can excel. And it's a place that takes us into the vast, uncharted territory that lies beyond cognitive intelligence. And so it gives us a massive world of exploration and adventure and discovery that lies ahead of us, instead of feeling like, oh, we're about to be taken over by AI, and that intelligence that I cultivated throughout my education and possibly throughout my working life is about to become redundant, which is a very prevalent story on the planet at the moment, and is true. If you think that you are defined by your cognitive intelligence, then that is absolutely true. And if you are totally reliant on cognitive intelligence for your work, then yes, that is a very challenging situation. So it's extremely important to realize that that is a very, very small part of who you are. Even if you've cultivated it to a very great extent, it is still a tiny part of who you really are. Once we start to get into the world of subtle energy, we are not only in the territory of all the patterns that lie behind our material life, but we're also in a multi-dimensional world. So there are many different dimensions that we can start to explore. So it really is a bit like the equivalent of, I don't know, the early explorers arriving in Africa and finding this entire continent that they had not only never experienced, but also was so different. For example, if you were a European arriving in Africa, or likewise, if you were an African coming to Europe for the same time, you were going to find very different cultures, very different climates, very different ways of living. The same if we look at Star Trek and we start to see ourselves as part of a galactic civilization and intergalactic travel. We have seen through many different films and television programs how different species exist in different climatic conditions, different planets. Very fascinating stuff. So to me, exploring superpowers or special abilities is just a part of exploring this vast territory of the world of energy. And that world of subtle energy is not only what lies behind the material world, it's also what forms the material world. It's what the material world is actually made out of. So it's not like we're going behind the scenes and ignoring the material. We're actually examining all aspects of material from the very 3D reality that we are familiar with and we think of as our own reality. Although everybody who is aware of subtle energy knows perfectly well that your reality consists of far more than what we typically think of as 3D. But this also goes into the three-dimensional or the multi-dimensional aspects of the energy world. And what I mean by that is that energy, subtle energy, just because we can't see it or we can't smell it, just because we can't touch it with our 5 physical senses, it doesn't mean that it is formless. It is actually full of form. The Christians and the Jewish tradition, and probably other traditions as well, have always recognized this in some ways. For example, they've described angels. They've had visitations from these otherworldly beings, and they have form. They've described what they look like. They had wings and they were very light, maybe. So they were not like, I used to think about energy as if it was just a kind of cloud, just a kind of or a mist, just like everything the same. And it took me a long time to realize that actually all of energy is formed in different ways. And we happen to exist with certain abilities to detect and to connect with certain aspects of that energy. That's what we call our reality. Some human beings connect very easily with parts that most of us don't, and they see and feel things that people who are very three-dimensional don't see and experience. So people who see ghosts, for example. I actually remember one woman who had a head injury, and after that she could see all these other beings sitting in the London Underground system in the tube that most of us don't see. And they weren't imaginary, they were actually in the same space, but not visible to us. The same, of course, goes for people who are able to see ghosts, people who receive communication from the other side after somebody they love has died, which is apparently a very, very common experience, much more common than we would ever imagine. People who can sense the subtle vibrations of things, people who sense the energy in a room or in a person. These are very familiar for those of us who are interested in going beyond intelligence, and where subtle energy is perhaps a secondary language. It might even be stronger than, French or German or any other languages you speak, because it's so familiar to you. It's so much your way of reading and navigating the world. So in that context, cultivating our superpowers or our special abilities becomes very interesting for multiple reasons. One reason is that it gives us a space that we can move into which is not occupied by technology. Yes, technology will compete with us because technology is always pushing the boundary as well in terms of what it can achieve. But there's an issue with technology, which is that it always achieves those kinds of improvements at a cost. Now, some technology is really useful and some of it costs too much, in my opinion. And where human beings can develop their inner technology to achieve those kinds of results, we are able to do that without the cost. And this is one of the things that is really, really interesting about special abilities that are developed in a truly ethical way, which is what I'm interested in. The other really valuable thing about it is that human beings, especially when we work in groups, actually can be tremendously powerful. And my understanding, my knowing, is that if we are facing a crisis on this planet of the kind of proportion that none of our experts knows how to resolve, and certainly if you watch the news, you would think that there are some of those coming up. There is one thing that is more powerful than all the clever people on the planet and all the technological interventions that we can come up with. And that is the power of human beings, especially in groups, to influence the subtle energy field in such a way that our physical, material reality changes. And it always changes for the better. And if it's done ethically, it will always change in a way that is beneficial to all. This is the crux of why I feel this is a very important topic. A superpower or a special ability is the ability to solve problems or to achieve things at a level that seems impossible at our current prevailing level of operation. So in the medical world, energy healing or spiritual healing or spontaneous healing is impossible. It's not to say it never happens, because I think many doctors have had experiences of it happening, but they have no explanation. They have no way to replicate that. They have no way to build technology that produces those kinds of results. And yet an experienced healer can be good enough to create better results more consistently than any medical system. I met a guy a few years ago called John Kortum, Kortum. You can look him up. He had discovered a system for diagnosis of illnesses and problems that he had tested extensively in a doctor's surgery. He'd worked alongside a physician, and he used to do a diagnosis first and keep it secret, and then the doctor would go and meet the patient and do a diagnosis, and then they would compare notes. And John consistently came out more accurate than the doctor. Very simple evidence of somebody who had a special ability. He did it by reading a combination of physical and subtle energy signs just by looking at you. I've actually done it. My husband and I both went to see him, and he could diagnose things that were just potential problems, possibly years before they actually became something, so that you could go and mitigate that. You could go and do something to heal that part of your body before it ever manifested at a level that would take you to go and visit a doctor. Very powerful ability that was more accurate than the technology that we currently have access to. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. When I first trained in energy, not my first teacher, actually my second teacher. So I was about 7 years in to the energy training that I did. She was a phenomenal healer. And I arrived the very first time in one of her sessions in Zagreb in Croatia. I walked into a theatre and the energy was thick. You know, you could feel it the minute you walked into the room. It was very tangible. And mostly it was filled with people who had health problems of every imaginable sort. There were people there who had terminal illnesses, lots of them. There were people there who had conditions that they'd seen the best specialists in the world and nobody was able to help. There were the most appalling, terrible things that people were suffering from. There were also people there with mental health conditions. They were practically walking up the walls. They were really crazy people. And she had a way of teaching people how to relax and how to just learn about energy. She taught us about energy, about subtle energy every single day. And people got better and better and better. And there were people who had literally gone from I remember one woman, her entire body system, physical system had collapsed because she had so many different health conditions and she was on so many different medications that her body couldn't handle it anymore. And after about 2 years of doing this healing, she was able to live a completely normal life, no longer in a wheelchair, no longer had cancer, no longer had, I think, rheumatoid arthritis, no longer had all the other huge array of symptoms that she had, every disease complicating every other disease. She lived a normal, happy life, a completely life-changing experience for her. And this was done in a systematic way. So it wasn't just a chance healing, oh, how amazing, but we can't repeat that. There was a systematic, repeatable way of teaching people in such a way that their bodies and their health became better and better and better. There was a guy there who had been born with, I think, 3 holes in his heart. Certainly at least one. I'm not sure if I'm remembering that correctly. That hole closed up. It was recorded. I've seen the scans. His doctor denied it and just said, well, we must have made a mistake. It can't have been there in the first place. That was a fairly common experience in those days because this kind of healing was simply not recognized in any way. So healing is clearly one of the ways, or one of the types of special ability or superpower that I'm talking about. And it's a very good example because it really shows us the model for every other kind of superpower. Because fundamentally, the model of healing is that as a healer, you are able to engage with certain specific subtle energy powers, or I could say subtle energies, or energy sources, or we could say energy beings, and there are different people will describe it in different ways. And I would say it's all of those, because they're all different ways of describing the same thing. And as a healer, you can access this source of subtle energy that is enhanced. It's more than what we normally have. And you are able to share that in a way that it has a positive effect on another person's physical health. There are many different ways of doing it. Some people heal with their hands. Some people heal through, my teacher healed through the way she spoke and energy transmission, which is what I've learned. Some people do it through all kinds of different modalities that they've learned, like Reiki, for example, but there are many, many different modalities. The fundamental essence of healing is always the same, this actually totally natural healing, which is healers will consistently describe, it feels like there's an energy flowing through me. I can feel an energy flowing through my hands. I have access to a kind of energy that is doing the healing. They will always say, it's not me who's doing the healing. There is an energy flowing through that does the healing. I'm the person who shows up for that energy. So a healer is able to invoke subtle energy, draw subtle energy in, but it's the energy itself that does the healing. Now let's apply this in other areas. What about being able to use energy in exactly the same way, not just for physical healing, but perhaps for relationship healing, or for financial healing, or for legal healing, or of course mental health healing? What about being able to access subtle energy in such a way that people can get results that, for example, in legal healing, the lawyers say that's not possible. In financial healing, your accountant or your business expert will say that's not possible. In mental health healing, your medical expert will say you need medication for that. You need to take a chemical synthetic medication to manage the symptoms of this thing because perhaps it's incurable or until you're able to manage without them. So that's what I mean when I say impossible. A superpower or a special ability is a fundamentally human ability to access subtle energy, or divine power is another way of describing it, which is not necessarily divine as in produced by God. You don't have to believe in God to do this. It can be a God thing. It can be a Holy Spirit thing if you're Christian. If you're not, if you have a spirituality that is not religiously affiliated, you can still access the same powers, but we might use a different language for it. Okay, but always the experience, there's something similar in the experience, which is the feeling like I didn't do this myself. I didn't use my brain. I didn't use my body. I didn't use my very human capabilities. I used my very human ability to tap into something more than me, something bigger than me, in order to create a result that is bigger than my physical and mental capability. So we can apply this to any area of life. We can apply it to solving problems, and we can apply it to achieving goals, transformation, change, anything that we want to. One of the things that's really interesting about this is what happens when human beings get together in groups, because actually, Jesus said it. He said, what did he say? Whenever two or more are gathered together in my name. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it's a very, let's look it up. Jesus said, when two or more of you are gathered together, I am with you. What he was saying is the power that he brought is there when people get together. What I've found and what I've seen from many different approaches is that when two or more people get together and speak about these things or are interested in these things, then that power becomes much more accessible. There's a really fascinating group of people who do some work called 3 Principles. It was developed by a Scottish guy. I'm not sure that he's alive anymore, but it's really simple. There are 3 principles, and when people talk about those principles, other people heal or solve their problems. It's very similar to the way that I was taught by my teacher. When she talked about energy, we solved our problems or created transformation or experienced transformation. So that's a really fascinating thing, because it means that just by talking, just by being curious, just by paying attention to the fundamental principles of life and energy, you create these enhanced superpower, special ability outcomes. This is a really important thing to take note of, because the better you get at talking about it, and that doesn't mean being somehow like very clever, it means being very simple, being very sincere, being very curious, always exploring what's beyond your capability, what you don't know how to do, always exploring the impossible. The more you do that, the better you become at it. And that's what makes a good teacher. They're just somebody who can talk about these things and people around them experience results. It also, of course, is what makes a good healer. So the interesting thing here is the expansion or the enhancement that happens when we get together around this. So doing it on your own is usually the hardest thing, especially because if you're trying to do it on your own, you're usually the one who's suffering. Suffering is the biggest kind of closer out of this enhanced energy, of this subtle energy that comes and creates solutions for you. Because when you're suffering, you're very contracted. There's pain, there's fear, there's a lot of contraction. Everything closes down. And that's why it's so difficult. The reason people sometimes experience miracles after extreme suffering is because there comes a point where they're no longer able to stay so closed. It becomes unbearable. The pain is so much that they actually just let go of everything. It's just like, I can't handle any of this anymore. They let go. They let go of all that contraction, and suddenly a whole lot of energy is able to flood into their system, and that energy brings the solution. So the solution is always available. Wherever there's a problem, there is a solution. They're actually partners. Problems create solutions, or solutions create problems. Whichever way you want to look at it, there's a bit of truth in both. So wherever there's a problem, there is always a solution. The solution is actually always very close. It's very accessible. But when we're suffering, when we're deeply contracted into ourselves, when it hurts so much, whether that's psychic hurt, mental, emotional, however you want to call it, or physical, or financial, or legal, any kind of pain, when it hurts so much that all we can do is shrink into our, oh, this is never going to end, or I don't know what to do about this, we close ourselves off from the very thing that knows what to do about it. We close ourselves off from the solution that is sitting right next to the problem. That solution is always in the future, if you see what I mean. Like if you have a problem, the solution isn't here yet, so it's in the future. That means it's contained in the energy field, but it hasn't landed yet. If you know that when you have a problem, you will immediately open up to the energy of solutions. And many business people get very good at this. They know the minute there's a problem, they start to get curious about solutions. Instead of sitting worrying about the problem, which is what makes you more and more contracted and more closed and more inaccessible to the solution, they get curious and interested. And they know that they don't have the solution, because if they had it, they would have solved it already. So they go out looking for a solution. They open themselves up, and remarkable things happen when you do that. Now, we don't want to live in a world where you have to be suffering so much that you can't handle it anymore. You run out of every possible solution, and it's become so painful that you let go. Like, in my experience, a very, very painful massage. I don't find massage very comfortable. So if I have a very painful massage, sometimes it becomes so painful that I have to let go, because I just can't go on experiencing it. And then it's like I surrender in some way. It's not an easy thing for me. Some people do it much more easily, but it's something like that. But who honestly wants to live like that? That's a terrible model. So what I'm interested in is a model where we learn something from this and say, well, how could we replicate this approach to superpowers, to special abilities, but as part of our daily existence? So we don't have to get into extreme suffering to be able to access that energy. We are able to access it whenever we want to and whenever we choose to. Now, I've already given you the clues to that. Curiosity is a massive one. Sincerity is actually really important. Being sincere. If you get clever, if you start trying to use your brain to do things, you don't need special abilities. It's like, I'm the one with all the answers. My mind will work this out. You actually close yourself to that subtle energy that could come and help you, because you're just literally giving the message to the universe, I'm what's needed here. I am the solution. There's a very different place, which is not saying I need to get out of the way, but I'm going to be the solution through my curiosity and openness to access a solution that is going to work for this situation. That's very different from, I'm going to solve this, I'm going to be the hero, I'm going to be the one. And sometimes these two sit very close to each other. There's what we used to call ego. I don't like that expression much, but it's useful sometimes. The ego one is like, I want to be the one who everybody says, oh, amazing, clever Sarah, she solved it all by herself. I want that satisfaction of being the one with my brain and my body to do it, compared to the one who says, I know there's a solution, I know that I don't have it, so I am open to that solution coming in, and I'm open to it coming in anyway. So it might come through another person. It might come through something that I've never seen before. It might come in a way that I don't even understand, but I'm willing to be here for it. I'm willing to stand for it, so that somehow that energy can get into our physical material world and reshape it so that the problem is solved. Because we are working at a fundamental level here with the subtle energy that makes the material world. And through our curiosity and our desire for a solution, we open up to a reshaping of the energy in the physical world that enables it to change so that our physical experience is different. And what that means is the pain goes away. The financial crisis is over because money comes in. The legal problem resolves itself in a way that leaves all the lawyers with their jaw dropped, like, how on earth did that happen? I've never seen that before. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. These kinds of results, but becoming normal, not becoming a crisis situation. We don't need to have a huge miracle, because we can have lots of small miracles. So how do we cultivate this as a way of life rather than as a solution to a disaster? There are multiple ways of doing that. I'm just going to talk about how I do this and how I teach it. I'm sure there are other ways out there. The first thing that I want to say is that for me, the ethical context is really important. There are people who teach special abilities for the sake of developing those abilities. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but this is not what I'm interested in. Yes, maybe some human beings can, for example, hover off the ground. I've seen videos. If you want to see a video of something like this, I think if you look up yoga hopping, it's very fascinating stuff. And yes, there are human beings who can do remarkable things, and they do prove that the impossible is possible. You can look up special abilities on YouTube, and you'll probably be able to find examples also of telekinesis, somebody moving a physical object without touching it. There will always be skeptics who say, oh, you know, it's a trick. And much harder these days with AI, because it could replicate this kind of thing just like that, and it would be much harder for us to know. But I have seen some of those videos at times, and I've heard many stories of things like this. But for me, I personally, maybe because I grew up in the 70s or whatever, I think that it's really important that we use these abilities for a purpose, which is to make the world better in some way. It's a real superpower, superhero kind of thing. Good superheroes don't come in to destroy. Good superheroes come in to rescue and to save the situation. And I think this is really important. If we want to develop superpowers, let's always use them for a benign purpose, not just to prove that we can. It's not about, oh, look at me, I'm amazing. It's about, there's a solution needed here, let's bring it in. For me, this is very important. And the ethics are a little bit different from the ethics that we're normally familiar with. Ethics in superpowers are not just about being a good person, having integrity, being honest, but they're also about your energy. There is something around being, to put it very simply, being happy, being a benign force in the world or a benign energy in the world, bringing a lightness to things. Not because heaviness, there's anything wrong with heaviness. Heaviness is very important. We actually want a heavy result. We want a result that is physical, comes all the way down to the ground. That's what I could call a heavy result. But it takes a certain lightness of being. I think if you bring heaviness, you bring a lot of yourself. Usually when we feel heavy about things, we feel limited. In order to access this energy, there is a way in which you need to open up to the unlimited, which is beyond your everyday experience of yourself. I'm not going to say it's beyond you, because in a way it's a part of you and you do have access to it, but it's beyond that normal physical experience that we have. So when we tend to feel heavy, we tend to be more locked into just our physical. If we're too light, we can be locked into just the non-physical, and then we don't get results. Okay, so actually the ethical place is a real balance, a real, or like a uniting of the light and the heavy, so that we're able to manifest and it becomes material. So I'm not interested in a healer who can do amazing things, speak light languages and codes and things, but my health doesn't change. We need to have this, it really is a unity between the physical and the non-physical. It's not just balance. It's not like they balance like this. They actually connect with each other. They are intertwined with each other. They are one, they're of the same nature, if you like. And so there's no separation between them. And then when we realize that, we can find an ethical position that enables this access to subtle energy to work much better. So the ethical piece is important. It's not something that you can just learn with your mind. It's something you learn through practice. If you find that things don't work, you will gradually adjust how you do it until you find what does work. If it works well and it feels really good and it creates a benign result for everybody involved and beyond, that becomes your ethical way of doing things. If you find you start to feel really proud of yourself and want to show off your ability, something inside you will tell you, hold on, I'm getting a little bit off track here. And that's where it begins to become unethical. If you start trying to force energy, it also can quickly become unethical. If you try to be forceful in a positive way, manipulative, or in a negative way, then you will start to receive feedback from the subtle energy field. And most of that feedback will be not feeling good. And then what typically happens is you start to ignore that not feeling good and you keep trying to force it or keep manipulating, perhaps without even realizing, and it feels even worse. And there comes a point where it feels so bad that you have to change. And that's your guardrail. I'm very grateful to have those guardrails because we do make mistakes in this. We don't always get it right the first time. So it's really useful to listen to that guardrail. If things start to become very uncomfortable in your life, pay attention. There is something that needs to change in your energy. And in relation to the development of these abilities, that's where it will show up. It will show up in pain, increasing dissatisfaction, increasing frustration, things not working for you, even though maybe you're able to create results with your ability, but other things around you are not working very well. That's where you need to pay attention, because that's where, when you allow this transformation in, how you apply your abilities will also be changed by it. It's kind of life's way of guiding you towards becoming a better and better human being. So that's an important one. And if you practice and pay attention, you'll keep learning, you'll keep getting better at it, and you will keep becoming more ethical. Let's say something a little bit more about this ethical piece, because it is possible to use energy to manipulate all kinds of things. We can do that with language. Sometimes people teach those techniques in business, for example, through NLP. How you can manipulate people into buying things. They talk about the dark arts in sales, for example. So you use trigger words that make people more likely to buy something. Many of us are allergic to those trigger words being used on us, and we can often still fall for it, which shows how powerful they are psychically. There are many, many ways of using energy to change reality in a way that is not beneficial. And we see that in the world a lot today. There's a tremendous amount of skill available to manipulate our physical reality, to manipulate our minds so we comply with decisions and laws that we don't even agree with or we don't think are right. So it's not just the ability to play with subtle energy as if it's a completely neutral force. When I talk about ethics, it's really important to understand that this energy, the energy of life, is fundamentally an energy of love. It is a spiritual energy, if you like, depending on what you mean by that word. But for me, if I understand that it is fundamentally an energy of love, that love is the underlying energy of everything, even of evil, even of the worst imaginable things. And I don't want to explore that topic now. I'm sure we'll come to it at another time. But this deep knowing of love being the how would you say it? Like the initiator, the impulse of life itself, the impulse of creation. When you know that, you cannot use energy to manipulate people. It becomes impossible. Love will not allow it. So ethics, that happiness I spoke about, that there's a sort of lightness and freedom of spirit, comes from the fact that you know deep in your being that what you are working with when you're working with energy is love. And what you're working with when you're helping somebody or solving a problem or creating something is love. You are always playing with the different shapes and forms of love. When you know that, then your ethics become aligned with who you are and with what life is. And then you're in very powerful territory. When we forget that, that's when things get uncomfortable and we get brought back. And every single time I've experienced that, I've found that it's always been an upgrade, if you like, of love. It's always been an expansion into greater capacity for love, is what has given me that next level of ability, but it's also what solved the problems, the pain that got my attention in the end, so that I knew that I had to change. So there's a lot of very interesting and subtle information packed into all the things I'm talking about here, about how this really works. So how do you practice it? The way you practice it is by being willing to show up for solving problems that other people say are impossible. I learned to do this with my teacher. I watched her doing it every day. I experienced change myself. When I went to my very first Chinese master, my very first teacher, I used to get migraines, and my skin was it was quite dry. And literally within weeks of working with him, I had no idea why. I never had another migraine, never had another headache. That's 36 years now. Never had another headache in my life. My skin just balanced itself out pretty much immediately, never went back. So these were very early signs for me that there's something going on here. Whatever, I didn't really have any clue, but I knew that there was something happening because I hadn't been able to resolve those things before. So this is the way we do it. We learn about it and we practice it. And the more we practice it, the better we get. And we practice it in simple ways. When you have a headache or you don't feel well, instead of saying, oh, where's the medicine? How do I get rid of this as fast as possible? You say, here's an opportunity for me to see if I can heal. You get curious about healing. You get interested in how healing works. And maybe you'll go and learn. Maybe you'll discover it on your own. Doesn't really matter. But that's the kind of result you get. When you have a financial problem, instead of saying, oh no, everything's going to go wrong, I can't manage this, and going into complete stress and worry and fear, you say, okay, where's the solution? You get curious, you get open. That is actually how you build your superpowers, your special abilities, is just by learning how to use them, by solving problems that no one else knows how to solve or that you don't know how to solve, and achieving things that you don't know how to achieve. And I recommend that you do it not by doing something so huge that it overwhelms you, but build it in small steps. Every time you have a little problem you don't know how to solve, get curious about the solution. Open to the solution, stop focusing on the problem. Give your energy to the solution, not giving your energy to the problem. You don't want to grow the problem, which is what most people do most of the time. You want to grow the solution, so pay attention to it. Give energy to it, and then you will find how this works. It's actually very simple. It's very accessible to all of us, and it comes from exactly what I'm talking about. Now, yes, you can go and learn, you can go and train with people, and that can accelerate things. You can not make so many mistakes. Perhaps you can get some advice when it's difficult. That's a really useful thing. But this is not rocket science. This is actually what we're made of. And therefore, it's something that every single person can do if you want to. Now, let's finish by talking about the power of the group. Lynn McTaggart's work is really worth reading. Lynn McTaggart wrote a brilliant book actually called The Field, which is not so much about this, but is all about subtle energy. If you're interested in the science of subtle energy, it's a little bit old now, but it's fascinating. I think it was published around the year 2000. Go and read, if you want to understand the scientific underpinnings of this, a wonderful, wonderful book is The Quantum Revolution by Paul Levy, with a foreword by Jean Houston. Amazing book for describing the physics of this. But Lynn McTaggart wrote a book called The Intention Experiment, and she wrote a book called The Power of Eight. These describe how small groups of people or large groups of people can achieve extraordinary results in exactly the kind of way that I'm talking about. So one of the very interesting things to explore these days is how we can work together in groups, in communities, to support people to get extraordinary results in their life and to build their own capacity, everyone building their own capacity for that, and then enhancing each other's capacity so that in any situation you face, you always have a team around you of people who understand this language, who know how to do this, who have access to superpowers. To me, this is the way we do two things. One is we de-risk the world. So if anything goes really wrong, we can get together as human beings and change the direction. Lynn McTaggart has done some spectacular experiments around war, where war is happening, and reducing the effects of it, or it appears, peace treaties being made very shortly after these experiments. Very fascinating stuff to read about. There are Power of Eight groups meeting all over the world and helping each other to get results. In my community, we constantly help each other to get very special results. That's really what we're doing all the time. We're actually developing the subtle energy ability to be able to work with superpowers. So the group thing, I said there are two things it achieves. So one thing is that it de-risks the world. As long as we are willing to come together in groups and do this, and maybe bigger and bigger groups, or maybe more and more skillful groups. I think that actually cultivating this ability is more important than the size of the group. A larger size of people who've done a lot of cultivation, that would be very, very good. But a very mixed up group where there's a lot of heavy emotion in the group is more difficult to work with. If you want to learn more about the proof of this, go and read about the Maharishi effect. Maharishi did a lot of research, and the Maharishi followers did a huge amount of research on what's called the Maharishi effect, which was about how groups of people meditating at a certain level reduce the level of violence in the surrounding area. That is also a special ability and part of what we're talking about here. So in addition to de-risking the world, we enable transformation of the world in a benign way. Most of the traditional approaches to solving the problems of today's world, I don't think guarantee benign results because they're often technological or just too much mind, too intellectually based, and they don't build in enough of that underlying energy and knowing of love. When we work with subtle energy and we're coming from a place of love, we can only attract solutions through our special abilities that are true expressions of love. And that's really powerful. That is the next stage of human evolution. That is where we move forward into a better version of ourselves. Clearly, where there's love, war is much less likely to happen. I can't say war doesn't exist. War is also an expression of love at some level. But it's also very clear that as we cultivate love, we have less war. We have less conflict. Where conflict arises, it becomes more positive and there's less destruction. These are just parts of our evolution that are inevitable. And our opportunity now, where our cognitive intelligence is facing such enormous competition, and where we know that through cognitive intelligence alone, we cannot necessarily solve some of the problems that we might face in the future. It is time for us to stand up and access the true abilities of being human, cultivate them, share them, use them, really work them. And let's de-risk the world and transform it into a better version, because all we're doing there is healing and creating health. We are getting rid of the risks of being very sick in the world, and we are creating health, a healthy system, healthy governance, healthy politics, healthy organizational systems, healthy ways of doing business with each other, healthy economies, healthy communities. That is the most natural thing in the world for human beings to strive for. And what I'm sharing with you today is a way that we can do that, that gives us meaning and purpose and direction in our world, regardless of what is going on in the world of physical technology. Let's develop our inner technology, because we are powerful in ways that we have barely started to touch. This is the unexplored territory of the next, I don't know how many millennia. This is really stuff worth growing in your life.